the scream that tore through the small cabin on the edge of Ruby City, Idaho, in the spring of 1882, was the kind that made even hardened men stop in their tracks and whisper prayers they had long forgotten. Zelda Brennan was only 7 months along, and the pains had started 3 hours before dawn, ripping through her body with a violence that left her gasping and clawing at the sweat-soaked sheets beneath her. Her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had run for the doctor immediately, her skirts flying as she rushed through the muddy streets of the mining town. The May rains had turned everything to muck, and the wheels of Dr. Whitmore's buggy had gotten stuck twice on the way back. By the time he arrived, Zelda's face was white as bleached cotton, her dark hair plastered to her forehead, and her screams had given way to a terrible, animal whimpering that was somehow worse. Dr. Whitmore was a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and hands that trembled slightly as he examined her. He had delivered hundreds of babies in his 30 years of practice, but the look on his face as he stepped back from the bed made Mrs. Patterson's heart sink like a stone in water. "It is too early," he said quietly, washing his hands in the basin. "Far too early. Even if the child comes, I cannot give you hope, Mrs. Brennan. Babies born this small, they do not survive. Not out here, not with what we have available, and with your husband gone." Zelda let out a sob that came from somewhere deep in her chest. Her husband Thomas had died 4 months ago in a mining accident, crushed when a support beam gave way in the Silver Star mine. She had been grieving him while trying to prepare for their first child, working long hours taking in laundry and mending to keep food on the table. The stress and the hard work had taken their toll, and now her body was giving up on the one thing she had left of Thomas. "Please," she gasped, gripping the doctor's sleeve with surprising strength. "Please, you have to try. This baby is all I have, please." Dr. Whitmore's expression was not unkind, but it was final. "I will do what I can for you, Mrs. Brennan, but you must prepare yourself. The child will likely be stillborn, or if it breathes at all, it will not be for long. I am sorry. I wish I had better news." The labor continued through the morning, brutal and unforgiving. Mrs. Patterson stayed, holding Zelda's hand and wiping her brow, but even her reassurances sounded hollow. 2 other women from the town came to help, but their whispered conversations in the corner of the room were not as quiet as they thought. Zelda heard every word about poor timing, about the Lord's will, about how it might be a mercy if the baby did not suffer long. By noon, the child came in a rush of blood and fluid. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Whitmore held the tiny, blue-tinged form in his hands, and for a long moment, no one breathed. Then, impossibly, there was a sound, a thin, reedy cry that seemed far too weak to sustain life. "It is a boy," Dr. Whitmore said, his voice tight. He wrapped the baby quickly in a clean cloth, but his movements were perfunctory, mechanical. "Mrs. Brennan, I must be honest with you. He is barely breathing. His lungs are not developed. He is cold, and I cannot get him warm. I do not believe he will last the hour. I am truly sorry." Zelda was sobbing openly now, reaching for her son with trembling arms. The doctor placed him against her chest, and she could feel how small he was, how impossibly fragile. He was no bigger than her 2 hands put together, his skin translucent and wrinkled, his chest barely moving with each struggling breath. "No," she whispered fiercely. "No, you fight. Do you hear me? You fight." But even as she said it, she could feel him growing colder against her skin. His tiny cry had already faded to nothing. Mrs. Patterson was crying quietly in the corner. Dr. Whitmore was packing his bag with the air of a man who had done all he could and seen it not be enough. "I will check back this evening," he said quietly. "But Mrs. Brennan, please do not torture yourself with false hope. Make your peace with this. I have seen it too many times. Babies this small, they simply cannot survive. Their bodies are not ready for this world." After he left, the cabin fell into a horrible, waiting silence. The other women departed one by one, each offering their condolences, each looking at the tiny bundle in Zelda's arms with the same pitying expression. Mrs. Patterson stayed the longest, but even she eventually had to return to her own family. She pressed Zelda's hand and said she would come back with some broth later, but they both knew what she really meant was that she would come back to help prepare the body for burial. Alone in the cabin, Zelda held her son and wept. She could feel his heartbeat, rapid and fluttering like a trapped bird, but growing weaker by the minute. His breathing was so shallow she had to put her face close to his to feel it at all. She tried to get him to nurse, but he did not have the strength to latch on, and she felt her own body failing to provide what he needed anyway, the shock and trauma having disrupted everything. "Please," she whispered to God, to Thomas, to anyone who might be listening, "please do not take him too. I cannot bear it, I cannot." But the afternoon wore on, and her son grew colder and stiller. She wrapped him in every blanket she had, pressed him against her skin, breathed her own warm breath on his tiny face, but nothing seemed to help. As the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, she felt the terrible certainty settling over her that Dr. Whitmore had been right. Her baby was dying, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. That was when she heard the sound of boots on her porch, heavy and deliberate. A knock followed, firm but not aggressive. "Mrs. Brennan." The voice was deep, rough-edged but not unkind. "It is Fletcher Brody. I heard about your trouble. I have come to help if I can." Zelda's first instinct was to send him away. Fletcher Brody was the ranch hand who worked at the Mackenzie spread just outside town. She had seen him a handful of times, a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that was always slightly too long, curling at the collar of his shirt. He had kind eyes, she remembered that, a warm brown that seemed at odds with the hard planes of his face. He had tipped his hat to her once in town, and she had nodded back, but they had never spoken more than a few words. But something in his voice, some quality of steadiness, made her call out, "Come in." The door opened, and Fletcher stepped inside, removing his hat as he did. He was even taller than she remembered, his shoulders broad beneath a worn canvas jacket. His face was weathered from years in the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes, but there was a gentleness in his expression as he looked at her that made something in Zelda's chest tighten. "I am sorry to intrude," he said quietly. "I was in town getting supplies when I heard the women talking. They said the baby came early and that the doctor said there was no hope. I know it is not my place, madam, but I have some experience with animals born too soon. Sometimes if you can keep them warm enough and get a little nourishment into them, they can surprise you. I thought maybe, if you would let me, I could try to help." Zelda stared at him, her vision blurred with tears. "He is dying," she said, her voice breaking. "He is so cold and he will not eat. The doctor said his lungs are not developed. He said I should prepare myself." Fletcher moved closer, his steps careful, as if approaching a spooked horse. He knelt beside the bed so that he was at eye level with her, and when he looked down at the tiny bundle in her arms, his expression was serious but not hopeless. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the baby. Zelda hesitated, then carefully transferred her son into Fletcher's large, calloused hands. The baby looked even smaller in his grasp, impossibly delicate. Fletcher studied him for a long moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "He is breathing," Fletcher said finally. "It is shallow, but it is there, and his heart is beating. I can see the pulse in his neck." "That means he is a fighter, madam. He has not given up yet, so we should not give up on him either." "What can we do?" Zelda asked desperately. I have tried everything. I do not know what else to try. Fletcher looked around the cabin, his mind clearly working. First, we need to get him warmer. Not just blankets, but real heat. Do you have any cloth that is very soft? Something that will not irritate his skin? Zelda nodded, pointing to a basket in the corner where she kept scraps of flannel and cotton. Fletcher retrieved it with one hand, still cradling the baby carefully in the other. He selected the softest pieces and began wrapping the baby more snugly, but not too tight. Animals that are born too soon, they cannot regulate their own body temperature, he explained as he worked. They need constant warmth, like they would have gotten if they had stayed in the womb longer. What we need to do is create a kind of nest for him, something that will hold the heat. He glanced around again and spotted Zelda's hot water bottle hanging by the stove. Can you fill that with warm water? Not too hot, but as warm as you can stand to touch comfortably. Zelda moved quickly, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the face of action, of purpose. She filled the bottle from the kettle that had been kept simmering on the stove and wrapped it in a towel as Fletcher instructed. Now, Fletcher said, we are going to make a kind of bed for him, close to your body so he can hear your heartbeat and feel your warmth, but with the hot water bottle nearby to keep the temperature up. And we need to keep the air around him warm and humid. His lungs are struggling because they are dry and not fully formed. If we can keep the air moist, it might help him breathe easier. He arranged pillows and blankets on the bed, creating a small nest with the hot water bottle at its base, wrapped in layers so it would not burn the baby's skin. Then he placed the baby in the nest and positioned Zelda beside him, her body curved protectively around the tiny form. Put your hand on his back, Fletcher instructed. Let him feel you there. Talk to him. Sing if you know any songs. He needs to know he is not alone, that someone is fighting for him. Zelda did as he said, her palm covering nearly her son's entire back. She could feel the fragile movement of his ribs as he struggled to breathe. What about feeding him? She asked. He will not nurse. Fletcher nodded as if he had expected this. Do you have an eyedropper, or a very small spoon? I have an eyedropper, Zelda said. I use it for medicine sometimes. Good. Clean it well, and then we are going to try to get some milk into him, just a drop or two at a time. He may not have the strength to suckle, but if we can get it into his mouth slowly, his instinct might kick in and he will swallow. It will not be much, but anything is better than nothing. For the next hour, Fletcher worked with a patience and focus that Zelda found astounding. He showed her how to express milk from her own body, just a small amount into a clean cup, and then how to draw it up into the eyedropper. He held the baby's head with infinite care while Zelda placed a single drop of milk on the baby's lips. At first, nothing happened. The milk just sat there, pooling at the corner of the tiny mouth. But Fletcher waited, his voice low and encouraging. Try again, just one drop, give him time. Zelda placed another drop, and this time, miraculously, the baby's tongue moved. It was the smallest motion, barely perceptible, but it was there. He swallowed. Zelda gasped, tears streaming down her face again, but this time they were not entirely tears of despair. That is it, Fletcher said quietly. That is good. He is trying, give him another. They continued like this, one drop at a time, until the baby had taken perhaps a teaspoon of milk in total. It was not much, but it was something. Fletcher then rigged up a kind of tent over the bed, using a sheet draped over a chair, and placed a pot of steaming water beneath it, creating a humid environment that seemed to ease the baby's breathing just slightly. As evening fell, Fletcher lit the lamps and kept the fire in the stove burning hot. He refilled the hot water bottle every hour, checked the temperature of the nest constantly, and helped Zelda continue the slow process of feeding the baby drop by drop. He did not speak much, but his presence was solid and reassuring, a steadying force in the chaos of Zelda's fear. "Why are you doing this?" Zelda asked at one point, her voice exhausted but curious. "You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." Fletcher was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the baby. "I lost a sister when I was a boy," he said finally. "She was born too early like your son. The doctor said the same things you heard today, but my mother did not give up. She fought for my sister for 3 days and 3 nights, trying everything she could think of. In the end, it was not enough. My sister died on the 4th morning." He paused, his jaw tightening. "But I have always wondered if maybe there was something more we could have done, some trick or method we did not know about. I have thought about it a lot over the years, especially after I started working with animals. I have saved a few foals and calves that were born too soon, and I have learned some things. I cannot promise this will work, Mrs. Brennan, but I cannot walk away without trying. I cannot let another mother lose a child if there is any chance at all, that I might be able to help." Zelda felt a wave of emotion crash over her, gratitude and sorrow and something else she could not quite name. "Thank you," she whispered. "Whatever happens, thank you for trying." Fletcher met her eyes, and in that moment, something passed between them, an understanding, a connection forged in the crucible of shared desperation and hope. The night was long and brutal. The baby's breathing remained shallow and labored, and several times Zelda was certain he had stopped altogether, only to feel the faint flutter of life return. Fletcher never left. He dozed in the chair beside the bed for short periods, but he woke every hour like clockwork to check on the baby, to refill the hot water bottle, to help Zelda with another feeding by dawn. Zelda was delirious with exhaustion, but the baby was still alive. His color had improved slightly, the blue tinge fading to a pale pink. His breathing was still far too fast and shallow, but it seemed marginally less labored than it had been the day before, when Dr. Whitmore arrived mid-morning, as he had promised. He stopped in the doorway and stared at the scene before him with open astonishment. Fletcher was at the stove, heating more water, while Zelda sat propped up in bed with the baby nestled against her in his makeshift heated nest. "He is still alive," Dr. Whitmore said, his tone caught between disbelief and something like disapproval. "Mrs. Brennan, I must tell you, I do not think it is wise to prolong this. The child is clearly suffering. The kindest thing might be to let him go peacefully." Fletcher turned from the stove, and the look he gave the doctor was hard enough to cut glass. "With respect, Doc, the baby is not suffering. He is fighting. And as long as he is fighting, we are going to help him fight. If you have nothing useful to contribute, then you can leave." Dr. Whitmore bristled, his thin frame drawing up stiffly. "I am a trained medical professional, Mr. Brody. I have seen cases like this dozens of times. The child's lungs are underdeveloped. His chances of survival are nearly zero, and even if by some miracle he lives, he will likely have permanent damage to his lungs or brain from lack of oxygen. I am trying to spare Mrs. Brennan false hope and further heartache." "And I am trying to give her son a fighting chance," Fletcher replied, his voice steady but unyielding. "You gave up on him before he even took his first breath. We have not given up, and we will not, so either help us or get out of the way." The two men stared at each other for a long moment, the tension in the room thick enough to choke on. Finally, Dr. Whitmore sighed and set his bag down on the table. "Very well," he said curtly, "but I will tell you now, I think you are making a mistake. However, if you insist on continuing this, then at the very least, let me examine the child properly and see if there is anything medically that can be done." He approached the bed and examined the baby with more care than he had the day before, listening to his chest, checking his color and his reflexes. When he finished, His expression was thoughtful but still guarded. "His temperature is better," the doctor admitted. "And his breathing, while still very poor, does seem marginally improved. Whatever you are doing with the humidity and the heat, it may be helping. But I must warn you, the next few days will be critical. If he makes it through the week, then perhaps, he may have a chance. But I would not count on it." He gave Zelda a few instructions about watching for signs of infection or other complications, left a small vial of drops that he said might help ease the baby's breathing, and then departed with a final warning not to get their hopes up. After he left, Zelda looked at Fletcher with exhausted but grateful eyes. "You stood up to him," she said softly. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Fletcher replied simply. "He was ready to let your son die without even trying. That does not sit right with me." Over the next several days, Fletcher barely left the cabin. He sent word to his employer at the Mackenzie Ranch that there was a family emergency and he would be gone for a while. And Mr. Mackenzie, a decent man, sent back word that Fletcher should take all the time he needed and that his job would be waiting for him. Fletcher and Zelda fell into a rhythm, working together to care for the baby around the clock. Every 2 hours, they fed him with the eye dropper, each feeding a painstaking process that could take up to an hour. Every hour, Fletcher changed the hot water bottle and checked the temperature of the nest. Every 3 hours, Zelda tried to get the baby to latch onto her breast, hoping that he would grow strong enough to nurse properly, but so far he remained too weak. The town women came by periodically, bringing food and offers of help, but their expressions were still full of doubt. Mrs. Patterson was the most supportive, marveling at the baby's continued survival and pitching in to help with cooking and cleaning so that Zelda could focus on the baby. But even she would shake her head and whisper that it was a miracle the child had lasted this long, and miracles usually did not last, but the baby did last. He lasted through the 2nd day, and the 3rd, and the 4th. On the 5th day, something remarkable happened. Zelda was trying once again to get him to nurse, more out of routine than any real hope, when suddenly she felt a tug. It was weak and brief, but it was unmistakable. The baby had latched on and was suckling. "Fletcher," she gasped, her voice shaking. "Fletcher, he is nursing. He is actually nursing." Fletcher, who had been dozing in the chair, was on his feet in an instant. He moved to the bed and watched with an expression of wonder as the baby, his tiny mouth working determinedly, drew milk from Zelda's breast. It was not much, and he could only manage it for a few moments before exhaustion overtook him, but it was progress. Real, tangible progress. "He is getting stronger," Fletcher said, and for the first time since this ordeal began, there was a note of cautious optimism in his voice. "He is not out of danger yet, not by a long shot, but he is fighting. He is a tough little thing." Zelda looked down at her son, at his tiny, wrinkled face and his impossibly small fingers, and felt a surge of fierce love and pride. "He is a Brennan," she said softly. "We are fighters, all of us." Fletcher smiled, a real smile that softened his weathered features and made him look younger. "What are you going to name him?" he asked. Zelda hesitated. She and Thomas had picked out names before he died, but they had been preparing for a healthy, full-term baby, not for this fragile creature who was fighting for every breath. The name they had chosen, Daniel, suddenly felt too formal, too heavy for this tiny warrior. "I will call him Danny," she said finally. "It is close to the name his father and I picked, but it feels right for him. Small but strong, that is what he is." "Danny Brennan," Fletcher said, testing the name. "I like it. It is a good name for a fighter." As the days turned into a week and then a week and a half, Danny continued to defy all expectations. He was still far too small and far too fragile, but he was alive, and he was growing. He began to nurse for longer periods, and his breathing, while still fast, became less labored. His color improved to a healthy pink, and he began to fill out slightly, losing some of that terrifying translucence. Dr. Whitmore came by several times, and each time he examined Danny, his expression grew more and more baffled. On the 10th day, he sat back and shook his head in wonder. "I do not understand it," he said frankly. "By all medical knowledge, this child should not have survived past the first night. Yet here he is, not only alive but seemingly thriving. It is beyond anything I have seen in my career." "Maybe medical knowledge does not account for love and determination," Zelda said quietly, glancing at Fletcher as she spoke. The doctor followed her gaze and seemed to take in, perhaps for the first time, the depth of Fletcher's involvement. The cowboy was currently at the stove, preparing a broth for Zelda since she needed to keep her strength up to continue nursing. He moved around the cabin with the ease of someone who belonged there, and the look he gave Zelda when he brought her the bowl was one of profound tenderness. "Yes, doctor," Whitmore said slowly. "Perhaps you are right, Mrs. Brennan. In any case, I believe your son is going to make it. He is not out of danger entirely, mind you. He will need special care for some time, and you will need to watch him closely for any signs of illness. But I think he has turned the corner. I think he is going to live." After the doctor left, Zelda and Fletcher sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the past 10 days settling over them. Danny was asleep in his nest, his breathing soft and steady, a sound that had become the most beautiful music in the world to Zelda. "Thank you," she said finally, turning to Fletcher. "I do not know how to thank you properly. You saved his life. You saved both our lives, really, because I do not think I would have survived losing him." Fletcher shook his head. "You would have. You are stronger than you think. But I am glad I could help. I am glad I was here." There was a pause, and then Zelda said very softly, "I do not want you to leave." Fletcher's head came up sharply, his eyes searching hers. "Mrs. Brennan, Zelda," she corrected. "Please, after everything, call me Zelda, and I mean what I said. I do not want you to leave. I know you have a job to get back to, and I know this was only supposed to be temporary, but I have gotten used to you being here. Danny has gotten used to you, and I think, if I am being honest, I do not know how to do this without you." She paused, gathering her courage. "And it is not just about Danny. It is about you. I like having you here. I like talking to you, and I like the way you look at my son like he is the most precious thing in the world. I like the way you take care of us, both of us, without making me feel weak or helpless. I know it has only been a short time, and I know this is not how things are supposed to happen, but I feel something for you, Fletcher. Something I did not expect to feel again after Thomas died." Fletcher was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood and crossed to the bed, kneeling beside it so that he was at eye level with her once more. "Zelda," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I have been trying not to say anything because I did not want to overstep. You are a recent widow, and you have been through so much. I did not want to add to your burden or make you feel like I was taking advantage of a difficult situation. But the truth is, I have felt something for you from the first moment I saw you in town months ago. You were carrying a basket of laundry, and you had this look of fierce determination on your face, like you were daring the world to try to knock you down. I thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen." He reached out and gently took her hand. "These past days, getting to know you, seeing how you fight for your son, how you refuse to give up even when everything seems hopeless, it has only made me care for you more. I do not want to leave either. I want to stay. I want to help you raise Danny, and I want to be here for you for whatever you need, if you will have me." Zelda felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were not tears of sorrow. "I will have you," she whispered. "I do want you, Fletcher. I want you to stay." He leaned forward and kissed her then, a soft, tender kiss that spoke of new beginnings and hope. When they pulled apart, Danny made a small sound in his sleep, and they both laughed quietly, the tension breaking into something warm and sweet. "I need to be honest with you about something," Zelda said after a moment. "I loved Thomas. I loved him deeply, and I will always carry a part of him with me. Danny is his son, and I will make sure Danny knows about his father." "I would not have it any other way," Fletcher said firmly. "Thomas was a good man, from what I heard around town. Danny should know about him, should be proud of him. I am not trying to replace Thomas, Zelda. I am just trying to be here for you now, in the present, and in the future if you will let me." "I will let you," Zelda said, squeezing his hand. "I do let you." Fletcher moved back to the Mackenzie ranch the following week to collect his belongings and give his notice. Mr. Mackenzie was understanding, even giving Fletcher a small bonus and a strong recommendation for future employment. Fletcher used the money to rent a small house on the outskirts of Ruby City, one with enough land for a garden and perhaps a few animals. It was not much, but it was clean and sturdy, and it was theirs. Zelda and Danny moved in 2 weeks later, once the doctor had declared Danny stable enough for the move. The baby was still small, much smaller than a typical baby his age would be, but he was thriving. He nursed hungrily and often, and his little limbs were beginning to fill out with healthy baby fat. His eyes, which had been unfocused and glassy in those first terrifying days, were now alert and bright, tracking movement and focusing on faces. Fletcher found work at a different ranch, one closer to town, and threw himself into building a life for them. He repaired the fence around their property, built a chicken coop and filled it with laying hens, and planted a vegetable garden that Zelda tended in the afternoons while Danny napped in a basket in the shade. They were not officially married yet. Zelda was still in mourning for Thomas, and they both agreed it would be proper to wait at least a year. But in every way that mattered, they were a family. Fletcher came home every evening to Zelda and Danny, and he spent his nights helping with feedings and changings, rocking Danny when he fussed, and sitting with Zelda on the porch after the baby was asleep, talking about their days and their dreams for the future. The town had plenty to say about the arrangement, of course. There were whispers and raised eyebrows, judgments about propriety and appearances. But Mrs. Patterson defended them fiercely, telling anyone who would listen about how Fletcher had saved Danny's life and how Zelda deserved happiness after all she had been through. Eventually, most of the town came around, especially when they saw how devoted Fletcher was to both Zelda and the baby. Summer turned to fall, and Danny continued to grow and thrive. By his 6-month mark, which should have been his 4-month mark if he had been born on time, he was the size of a typical 3-month-old, still small but catching up. He smiled and laughed, reaching for Fletcher's face and gurgling happily when the cowboy sang to him in a surprisingly pleasant baritone. One evening in late September, Fletcher came home from work to find Zelda in the garden, harvesting tomatoes. Danny was on a blanket nearby, kicking his legs and making happy sounds at the sky. Fletcher stood at the fence for a moment, just watching them, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was what he had always wanted, he realized. Not just a wife and a child, but this. This sense of belonging, of purpose, of being exactly where he was meant to be. He had spent so many years drifting from ranch to ranch, never putting down roots, never letting himself care too much about anything or anyone. But now, looking at Zelda and Danny, he could not imagine being anywhere else. He opened the gate and walked over to them, dropping a kiss on Zelda's cheek and scooping Danny up into his arms. The baby squealed with delight, his small hands tangling in Fletcher's hair. "How was your day?" Zelda asked, smiling at the sight of them together. Long, Fletcher admitted. We were branding cattle and one of the young bulls decided he did not want to cooperate. But it is over now and I am home and that is all that matters. He paused, then said, Zelda, I have been thinking. I know we agreed to wait a year before getting married, and I do not want to rush you, but I also do not want to wait any longer than we have to. What would you say to a spring wedding? It will have been a year since Thomas passed, and I think it would be fitting. A new season, a new beginning. Zelda looked at him, her eyes soft. I think that sounds perfect, she said. A spring wedding. I would like that very much. Fletcher grinned, a wide, boyish grin that made him look almost young. Then a spring wedding it is. You have made me the happiest man in Idaho, Zelda Brennan. I hope you know that. And you have made me happier than I ever thought I could be again, Zelda replied. You and Danny both. You are my family, Fletcher. You are my home. That winter was hard, as winters in Idaho always were. The snow came early and deep, and there were days when Fletcher could barely make it to the ranch and back. But their little house was warm and cozy, the fire always burning, and Zelda kept the stove going with soups and stews that filled the air with wonderful smells. Danny celebrated his first Christmas, though he was too young to understand it. Fletcher carved a small wooden horse for him, sanding it smooth so there were no rough edges, and Zelda knitted him a soft blanket in shades of blue and green. They sang carols together in the evenings, Fletcher's deep voice blending with Zelda's clear soprano, and Danny would watch them with wide, fascinated eyes. By the time spring arrived, Danny was nearly a year old and walking, or at least toddling, clutching at furniture and Fletcher's legs as he explored his world. He was still smaller than other children his age, and Dr. Whitmore warned that he might always be on the small side and that his lungs might always be a bit weaker, making him more susceptible to colds and coughs. But he was healthy and happy, and that was all that mattered. Zelda and Fletcher were married on a bright April morning in 1883, exactly 1 year and 2 weeks after Danny's harrowing birth. The ceremony was held in the small church in Ruby City, with Mrs. Patterson standing up as Zelda's witness and Mr. Mackenzie standing up for Fletcher. Danny, dressed in a little suit that Zelda had sewn herself, sat on Mrs. Patterson's lap during the ceremony, babbling happily and occasionally reaching for his mother. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Fletcher kissed Zelda with a tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of more than one witness. Then he scooped Danny up and kissed his forehead, and the three of them walked down the aisle together, a family in every sense of the word. They held a small reception at their house, with food provided by the neighbors and music played by a local fiddler. It was simple and unpretentious, but it was perfect. As the sun set and the guests began to depart, Fletcher and Zelda stood on the porch, watching Danny toddle around the yard under Mrs. Patterson's watchful eye. A year ago, I did not think I would survive losing Danny, Zelda said quietly. And now look at us, married, happy, with a healthy son. It feels like a dream. It is not a dream, Fletcher said, wrapping his arm around her waist. It is real, and it is ours. We fought for this, Zelda. We earned it. We did, she agreed, leaning into him. And I am so grateful, for you, for Danny, for all of it. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, watching their son play and feeling the quiet joy of simply being together. The years that followed were not always easy. Fletcher's work at the ranch was hard and sometimes dangerous, and there were times when money was tight. Danny did get sick more often than other children, and there were a few scares when his breathing became labored and they had to recreate the steam tent from his first days of life. But he always pulled through, his fighting spirit as strong as ever. When Danny was 3, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. The pregnancy was fraught with anxiety, both of them terrified that history would repeat itself. But this time, everything went according to plan. Zelda carried the baby to full term, and on a snowy January day in 1885, she gave birth to a healthy, full-sized daughter they named Clara. Fletcher held Clara for the first time with a mixture of awe and relief. She was so much bigger than Danny had been, so pink and robust and loud. Danny, now a curious and energetic 3-year-old, was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to touch her constantly and ask a million questions. "Is she going to stay?" he asked Fletcher seriously. "She is not going to leave like Mama said my other dad did." Fletcher knelt down so he was eye level with the boy. "She is going to stay," he said firmly. "And so am I, Danny. I am not going anywhere. We are a family, and families stick together." Danny seemed satisfied with this answer and carefully patted Clara's head with one small hand. "Okay," he said. "She can stay. She is very small, though. We need to take care of her." "We do," Fletcher agreed, his heart swelling with love for this little boy who had fought so hard to live and who was now so concerned about his baby sister. "And we will. You and me and Mama, we will all take care of her together." As Clara grew, the family settled into a comfortable rhythm. Fletcher continued to work at the ranch, eventually earning enough trust and respect to be made foreman. The extra money allowed them to buy the house they had been renting and to make improvements to the property. They added a barn and got a cow for milk, a pair of pigs, and a horse that Fletcher taught both children to ride as they got older. Danny grew into a bright, imaginative boy who loved stories and books. He was still small for his age, and his lungs still troubled him occasionally, but he learned to manage it, knowing when to rest and when he could push himself. He was close with his sister Clara, who adored him and followed him everywhere. When Danny was 7, Zelda sat him down and told him the full story of his birth, of how he had come too early, and how the doctor had said he would not survive. She told him about his father Thomas, showing him the few photographs and keepsakes she had saved. And she told him about Fletcher, about how he had refused to give up, about how he had fought for Danny's life when no one else believed it was possible. "Fletcher is not your father by blood," Zelda said gently, "but he is your father in every other way that matters. He loves you just as much as he loves Clara, and he has been there for you since the very beginning." Danny listened intently, his small face serious. When Zelda finished, he was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he said, "I know Fletcher loves me. He tells me all the time, and I love him too. He is my pa." He paused, then added, "But I am glad you told me about Thomas. I wish I could have known him, but I am glad I have Fletcher. I think maybe Thomas would be glad too that someone was here to take care of us." Zelda pulled him into a hug, tears streaming down her face. "I think you are right," she whispered. "I think Thomas would be very glad." That evening, Danny sought out Fletcher, who was in the barn tending to the animals. "Pa," he said, using the title he had been calling Fletcher for years, but somehow sounding more intentional about it now. Fletcher turned, a smile on his face. "Yes, son, Mama told me about when I was born. About how you saved my life." Fletcher set down the brush he had been using on the horse and knelt down. "Your Mama and the doctor and Mrs. Patterson all helped too," he said. "And you saved yourself, really. You fought harder than anyone I have ever seen." "But you did not give up on me," Danny said. "Even when everyone else did. Mama said you stayed with us and took care of us, and that is why I am here." "I could not give up on you," Fletcher said simply. "From the moment I saw you, I knew you were special. I knew you were worth fighting for." Danny threw his arms around Fletcher's neck, hugging him tightly. "Thank you," he said, his voice muffled against Fletcher's shoulder. "Thank you for saving me, and thank you for being my pa." Fletcher hugged him back, his own eyes damp. "Thank you for letting me be your pa," he said. "It is the greatest honor of my life." 2 years later, Zelda gave birth to another child, a son they named Henry, and 2 years after that, another daughter, Lucy. The house was full of noise and laughter, of children running and playing, of meals shared around the big table Fletcher had built, of bedtime stories and lullabies. Danny remained the oldest, and he took his role seriously. He helped with the younger children, reading to them and playing with them. And as he got older, he helped Fletcher with the work around the property. He was not as physically strong as other boys his age, his small stature and weaker lungs holding him back, but he was smart and clever, always finding ways to work around his limitations. When he was 15, Danny announced that he wanted to be a doctor. "I want to help people like me," he said. "Babies who are born too early, or people who are sick and everyone thinks they cannot be saved. I want to be the person who does not give up on them." Fletcher and Zelda were immensely proud. It would not be easy. Medical school was expensive, and it would mean Danny leaving home for several years. But they were determined to make it happen. Fletcher took on extra work, and Zelda went back to taking in laundry and mending. They saved every penny they could, and the entire family pitched in, even the younger children doing small chores to earn a bit of money here and there. When Danny was 18, he left for medical school in San Francisco. It was a bittersweet day. The entire family gathered at the train station to see him off. Clara cried, and Henry and Lucy clung to his legs, begging him not to go. Zelda hugged him tightly, whispering advice and encouragement in his ear. Fletcher was the last to say goodbye. He gripped Danny's hand firmly, then pulled him into a hug. "I am so proud of you," he said, his voice thick. "You are going to do great things, son. You are going to help so many people." "I learned from the best," Danny said, his own voice unsteady. "Everything I know about not giving up I learned from you, Pa." Fletcher pulled back, looking Danny in the eye. "You write to us, you hear, and you come home whenever you can. This will always be your home." "I will," Danny promised. "I love you, Pa. I love all of you." The train pulled away, and Fletcher stood on the platform with his family, watching until it disappeared from sight. Zelda slipped her hand into his, and he squeezed it gently. "He is going to be fine," she said softly. "He is strong. We raised him to be strong." "I know," Fletcher said, "but I am going to miss him. The house will not be the same without him." "No," Zelda agreed, "but it is a good thing. He is following his dream. That is what we always wanted for him." Danny excelled in medical school, his passion and determination setting him apart from his peers. He wrote home regularly, long letters full of stories about his studies and the people he was meeting. He came home for Christmas and summer breaks, and each time he arrived, the entire family celebrated as if he had been gone for years instead of months. After he graduated, Danny returned to Idaho, opening a practice in boys where he specialized in difficult births and premature infants. He became known for his willingness to try unconventional methods, for his refusal to give up on patients others deemed hopeless. He saved lives that no one else could save, and he did it with the same fierce determination that had kept him alive all those years ago. Fletcher and Zelda remained in Ruby City, growing old together in the house they had built into a home. Clara married a schoolteacher and moved to Portland, but she visited often with her own children. Henry took over Fletcher's position as ranch foreman, and Lucy married a shopkeeper in town and stayed close by. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Fletcher and Zelda sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the mountains. Their hair was gray now, their faces lined with age, but their love had only deepened over the years. "You remember the day we met?" Zelda asked, her hand in his. "I remember," Fletcher said. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, and that your son was the tiniest, most fragile thing I had ever held. I remember being terrified that I would not be able to help, that you would lose him and I would lose my chance to know you. But you did help, Zelda said. You saved him. You saved both of us, really. I do not know what would have happened if you had not shown up that day. Fletcher shook his head. I think you would have found a way. You are the strongest person I know, Zelda. You always have been. Maybe, she conceded. But I am glad I did not have to do it alone. I am glad I had you. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Zelda said, We have had a good life, have we not? The best, Fletcher agreed. We have had our struggles, but we have had so much joy too. 4 wonderful children, grandchildren, a home we built together. I would not change a thing. Neither would I, Zelda said, leaning her head on his shoulder. I love Thomas, and I will always be grateful for the time we had together. But you, Fletcher, you are the love of my life. You are my partner, my best friend, my everything. Fletcher kissed the top of her head, his heart full. And you are mine, he said. Always. The years continued to pass, and the Brody family grew and flourished. Danny married a nurse he met at his practice, a kind, intelligent woman named Sarah, and they had 3 children of their own. He continued his work saving premature babies, and he often told his patients about his own story, about the cowboy who had refused to let him die. Fletcher and Zelda lived to see their great-grandchildren, a blessing they never took for granted. They remained active and involved in their families' lives, always ready with advice or a listening ear, always there for the big moments and the small ones. When Fletcher was 72, he fell ill with pneumonia. It came on suddenly, and despite Danny's best efforts and the most modern treatments available, it became clear that he was not going to recover. The entire family gathered around his bedside, Zelda holding his hand and refusing to leave his side. I am not ready to let you go, she whispered to him, tears streaming down her face. I have loved you for so long, Fletcher. I do not know how to be without you. Fletcher squeezed her hand weakly, his breathing labored. You will be fine, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You are strong, Zelda. You have always been strong, and you will not be alone. You have our children, our grandchildren. They will take care of you. He looked around the room at the faces of his family, at Danny and Clara and Henry and Lucy, at the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried his name and his legacy. I have had a good life, he said. A life full of love and purpose. I have no regrets, none at all. Danny leaned in close, his own face wet with tears. Thank you, Pa, he said. Thank you for everything. Thank you for saving me, for raising me, for showing me what it means to never give up. You saved yourself, son, Fletcher said, echoing the words he had said so many years ago. You have always been a fighter, I just helped you along the way. He turned back to Zelda, his eyes full of love. I will wait for you, he said. Wherever I am going, I will wait for you, and when you are ready, we will be together again. I will find you, Zelda promised. I do not care if it takes forever, I will find you. Fletcher smiled, a peaceful, contented smile. I know you will, he said. Then his eyes closed and his breathing slowed, and with his family surrounding him and the woman he loved holding his hand, he passed quietly into the next life. The grief was overwhelming, but the family pulled together, supporting each other through the loss. They buried Fletcher in the Ruby City Cemetery, on a hillside overlooking the mountains he had loved. The entire town turned out for the funeral, a testament to the man he had been, to the lives he had touched. Zelda lived for another 8 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She spoke of Fletcher often, always with a smile, remembering the good times and the hard times and everything in between. She told her great-grandchildren stories about the cowboy who had saved their grandfather's life, who had built a family out of love and determination and sheer force of will. When Zelda passed, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 81, the family buried her beside Fletcher. On the headstone, they inscribed both their names along with the words, "Together in life, together in eternity. Love never fails." Danny, now a respected elder in his field and a grandfather himself, stood at the graveside and thought about the journey that had brought them all to this moment. He thought about the tiny, fragile baby he had been, about the doctor who had given no hope, about the cowboy who had held on when no one else believed it was possible. He thought about his mother's strength, about Fletcher's unwavering determination, about the love that had sustained them through the darkest times and carried them through to joy. He thought about the family they had built, the lives they had touched, the legacy they had left behind. And he knew with absolute certainty that every moment of struggle, every moment of fear and pain and doubt had been worth it, because love had won. In the end, despite everything, love had won. Life had won. Danny placed a hand on the headstone, feeling the warmth of the sun-heated granite beneath his palm. "Thank you," he whispered, speaking to both his mother and the man who had been his father in every way that mattered. "Thank you for fighting for me. Thank you for showing me what love really means. I promise I will carry it forward. I promise your legacy will live on." And it did. The Brody family continued to grow and thrive, generation after generation, each one carrying forward the lessons of strength and determination and unwavering love that Fletcher and Zelda had taught. They became doctors and teachers, ranchers and shopkeepers, each finding their own path, but always remembering where they came from. The story of the premature baby who should have died, the grieving widow who refused to give up, and the cowboy who held on until life won became a family legend, passed down through the years. It was a story of hope in the face of despair, of love conquering impossible odds, of the power of human connection to change everything. In Ruby City, the little house that Fletcher had rented and later bought still stood, restored by the family and preserved as a reminder of where it all began. Visitors could come and see the simple cabin, could imagine the desperate night when a tiny baby fought for his life while a cowboy and a widow worked tirelessly to save him. The story spread beyond the family, becoming a part of Idaho's history, a testament to the spirit of the Old West where survival was never guaranteed, but where determination and love could make miracles happen. Medical students read about Danny Brody's early life and drew inspiration from it, applying his techniques to save other premature infants. But for the Brody family, it was never just a story or a piece of history. It was the foundation of everything they were, the reminder that no matter how dark things seemed, no matter how impossible the odds, there was always hope. There was always a reason to fight, and there was always love. On the 100th anniversary of Danny's birth, the family gathered in Ruby City for a reunion. Over 200 descendants came from all over the country to celebrate the man who had started it all and the love story that had made it possible. They stood together in the old cemetery, surrounding the graves of Fletcher and Zelda, and they told the story once more. They talked about the spring day in 1882 when a baby came too early and a doctor gave no hope. They talked about the cowboy who refused to accept defeat, who held on with stubborn determination until life won, and they celebrated. They celebrated the family they had become, the lives they were living, the love that bound them together across time and distance. They celebrated Fletcher and Zelda, whose love had started it all, whose courage and strength had given them all the gift of life. As the sun set over the Idaho mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, the Brody family stood together, united by blood and by story, by the knowledge that they were the living proof that love conquers all, that hope is never wasted, and that sometimes, against all odds, miracles really do happen. The legacy of Fletcher Brody and Zelda Brody lived on, not just in the genes passed down through generations, but in the values they had instilled, the love they had shared, and the example they had set. They had shown that family was not just about blood, that love could bloom in the darkest times, and that sometimes the greatest heroes were not the ones who won battles or conquered territories, but the ones who simply refused to give up on a single precious life. Their story became a beacon of hope for anyone facing impossible circumstances, a reminder that where there is love and determination, there is always a way forward. The cowboy and the widow, the premature baby who defied all expectations, the family built on love and sacrifice. They all became part of something larger than themselves, part of the great story of the American West, where ordinary people did extraordinary things simply because they had to, because love demanded it, because life was precious and worth fighting for. And in the end, that was the true happy ending. Not just that Danny survived, not just that Fletcher and Zelda found love, but that their story continued to inspire, to give hope, to remind people that even in the darkest moments when doctors offer no hope and the future seems impossibly bleak, there is still a chance. There is still love. There is still life. The Brody family knew this truth in their bones, carried it with them wherever they went, and they made sure that every child born into the family heard the story, understood the legacy, knew the power of the words that had become their family motto: hold on. Love fights. Life wins. Those words, simple but profound, became the guiding principle for generations of Brodys. They held on through economic depressions and world wars, through personal tragedies and professional setbacks. They fought with love for their marriages, their children, their communities. And time again, life won. The story of Fletcher and Zelda, of their impossible love and their miraculous son, was more than just a tale from the past. It was a living testament to the power of the human spirit, to the strength of love, to the importance of never, ever giving up. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories are not won on battlefields or in grand gestures, but in small cabins on the edge of mining towns, where ordinary people make extraordinary choices and change the world one life at a time. And so the story lived on, passed from grandparent to grandchild, from parent to child, a precious inheritance more valuable than gold or land. The story of how a cowboy held on until life won, of how love conquered impossible odds, of how a family was born from tragedy and determination and sheer stubborn hope. It was, in the end, a perfect love story. Not perfect because it was easy, but perfect because it was real. Because it was tested and tried and proven true. Because Fletcher and Zelda had chosen each other, had chosen Danny, had chosen hope when despair seemed so much easier. And in making those choices, they had created something beautiful and lasting and infinitely precious. Their love had saved a life. Their love had built a family. Their love had created a legacy that would endure for generations. And that, more than anything else, was the true miracle. Not just that Danny survived his first hours and days, though that was miraculous enough, but that from that desperate beginning, from that moment of crisis and fear, came something so beautiful and strong and enduring. Love had won. Life had won. And the story, the beautiful, heartbreaking, triumphant story, would continue to be told as long as there were Brodys to tell it, as long as there were people who needed to hear that miracles can happen, that love is real, and that sometimes, against all odds, the impossible becomes possible. Fletcher and Zelda's love story had started in tragedy and desperation, but it had bloomed into something magnificent. And every child born into the Brody family, every life lived and loved under their legacy, was proof that their fight had been worth it, that their love had mattered, that their story deserved to be told and retold and celebrated for all time. The Wild West had been full of stories of gunslingers and gold rushes, of lawlessness and frontier justice. But the real story, the one that truly mattered, was this: a cowboy and a widow, a premature baby who refused to die, and the power of love to create miracles. That was the story worth remembering, worth celebrating, worth passing down through the ages. And so it was. The story of Fletcher and Zelda Brody, of their son Danny, of the family they built and the love they shared, became a permanent part of the tapestry of the American West, a shining example of the best of humanity, of what we can accomplish when we refuse to give up, when we choose love over despair, when we hold on until life wins. Their story was complete, their ending happy, their legacy secure. They had lived and loved and fought and won, and in doing so, they had given the world something precious and rare. Proof that love really does conquer all, that hope is never wasted, and that sometimes when we need it most, miracles really do happen.